Good morning, everyone. How are you?
Good.
Hope you feel as good as you look. It is such an honor to be here, and I really say that in all sincerity. Just being in this space, in this faith community, some of my earliest memories of inspiration in life happened in this community and in this church. I remember being a little boy hanging out with my father, who was formerly one of the leaders of one of Chicago's first black street gangs, who matured out of the gang in his early 20s, became an outreach worker, very similar to the guys that you see and the young women that you see today working for community violence intervention programs like, you recall, do you remember the ceasefire, those programs, right? So you have a lot of them now in the form of groups like Activist Inc. You have Project Hood, which is right down the street. You have Chicago Cred, you have Chicago Ready, so you have these programs all over the place in Chicago, all over the United States of America. But they started right here in Chicago. The concept of taking young men and women who had lived experience in the streets, like my dad, who was a former member of the Chicago Vice Lords on the West Side. But typically what happens in the streets, young people who are graded by the streets, generally what happens is they gang bang or participate in gangs in their teen years, when they get, if it's a natural process and they live in a marginalized community. What normally happens is some of them, depending on their personality types, get caught up in gangs that may go to juvenile detention or something. But generally, when they get to their early 20s or so, when they wise up and see that this is really not a sustainable lifestyle, and I'm speaking in terms of in more intact, healthy communities, even though they may be impoverished, maybe marginalized. Typically in those neighborhoods, kids, when they get old enough to, even if they didn't get an education, if they can get a decent job, they mature out in their early 20s. Get a living with a decent job, begin to raise their families, and so on and so forth. However, when the economy is a lot more strained, conditions of marginalization get worse, then it extends that period of gang participation, so to speak. Fortunately for my father, he grew up in an era where he could mature out. Got a job working with the post office, even though he had minimal education at the time. I don't think he had even attended high school, maybe 1 year of high school at the time. But in his early 20s, met my mother, got married, raised us. But then he got a job working back in the days of the early to mid 60s. Got a job as an outreach worker, as a guy with lived experience, got hired by the YMCA as a detached worker to go out and work with this emerging gang population in Chicago. So an outreach worker, we call them outreach workers, some people call them violence interrupters, but these are individuals, paraprofessionals that speak the language of the streets, engage young men, particularly that are involved with gangs, try to get them back on track, get them in school, get them jobs, give them some productive social things, get them out of the streets, right? So as a kid, I would hang out with my pops in the summertime, and he was assigned to the Stones, the Black Stone Rangers, who were born and birthed right here in this neighborhood, right on the street Blackstone, which is where they took their name from. And the street Woodlawn, which is right west of here, was the dividing line between the Blackstone Rangers and the Disciples. And I remember very distinctly being in here, as Reverend Black mentioned, Reverend Fry, who was the pastor of First Pres at the time, used to allow the Stones privileges of using the building, using the fullness of the church to hang out, and kind of used it as a place to have parties and this type of thing. We had a discussion, Reverend Black and I, early on about one of the biggest critiques in the book that Natalie Moore and I wrote was the criticism of white liberals who at the time came into the urban communities to help, but had a different way of engaging black youth, which was counter to how the traditional African American community raised kids. And what it did was it created a rift in the community, and it ended up being a process of the guys who were in gangs facilitating their gang behavior in a way that it gave them shelter, it gave them it gave them resources, and not really having the proper guidance. And what happened with whites who were coming into this space, not understanding the culture, wanting to help, but not understanding how to engage this population, facilitated some of the problems that then the broader African American community suffered from. So, I talk about some of these things in the book, and one of the things we want to talk about today is just how to help without getting in the way of the culture of the community, and allowing the tradition of the community to lead the work. Right, so nevertheless, I remember being in here, my dad, who was assigned to the Stones, with this, if you could imagine this facility being just, as far as you could see, young African-American males in this space. They wore red, what they call red suns, which is kind of like a red tan throughout the place. And one of the things that I remember them being in this space, but being so orderly. You could hear a pin drop. And I remember Jeff Ford, who was the leader of the gang at the time, was in the back of the room. And when he walked from the back, well, it was a little chatter. So they were just talking normally as young people would talk. But when he began to walk from the back, and remember, these guys are in their late teens, early 20s. Majority of the guys in here were teenagers. As he walked from the back to the front to speak, it was a hush over the room, just a silence. And so he came to the front and, greeted them. And the whole time that he spoke, it was just utter silence. And all you could hear was his voice. And that was, to me, I had never seen anything like that before. I was like, wow, what was this? And he was a young man, very, early 20s or so. And I was really impressed. I couldn't have been more than maybe about 8 years old myself at the time. But it was an impressive sight for me to see such a young man command the attention in a room of young guys who no one else could control, right? Who caused all kind of chaos in the community. And it wasn't a fear. It wasn't a silence out of fear. It was a silence of reverence and respect. Ultimately, that thing went in another direction, and it turned into what chaos we have today. But what I wanted to just share with us, we have less than 30 minutes to have this discussion about what's going on today and how we can help community, especially as it relates, help the community as it relates to this gun violence problem that we have. One of the things that we want to keep in mind, let's really get straight to the point in terms of what we're talking about. We know that close to 85% of the victims and the perpetrators of gun violence in Chicago and in urban communities, whether it is the inner city or the metropolitan area, in Chicago, New York, LA, wherever, is occurring among a very specific group of individuals. These are young African-American males as the perpetrators and the victims. So these are young black men killing each other, shooting and killing each other. And so we really need to talk about this thing within that context and what's going on within that population. So a few things we know. We know this: the neighborhoods that those young men live in, especially here in the city of Chicago, they don't live all over the place. They live in very specific areas. And if you look at this map of the city of Chicago, these multiple maps, these are some of the characteristics of the communities that they live in have in common. First of all, they are predominantly African American communities, 90% or so, the neighborhoods that they live in. It's one thing that they have in common. That the poverty rate in these neighborhoods tend to be twice the level of poverty in any other area, so high rates of poverty in these neighborhoods. Interestingly, education is not the problem that a lot of people think. Like, so education is a problem, but it's not that many of these young men have not gone to high school and even graduated from high school, compared to the Latino community, where you will see less academic achievement, but less violence. In the African American community, academic achievement doesn't always play out or turn out to be less violent, right? And we know that unemployment is high in their neighborhoods as well. And last but not least, crime and violence is high in those neighborhoods. So, what's actually going on in these neighborhoods that drive the gun violence? And what I wanted to share with you here is, if you look at this map, I know it's probably too difficult to see. I don't think I can blow that up anymore, but this is a whole city. Same map that you just looked at, right? If you look at those yellow areas, those areas are the areas that have the highest. These are the 10 beats. We'll talk about beats shortly, but these are the 10 beats that have the highest rates of gun violence in the city of Chicago. So you can see this is not spread out all over the city, is it? This neighborhood that you see here on the west side of Chicago, or neighborhoods, multiple neighborhoods, consist of North Lawndale, right, as one of the neighborhoods in this cluster. You have West Garfield, East Garfield, a little bit of Austin, moving closer towards Oak Park, and a little bit of Humboldt Park on the west side. So the neighborhoods on the west side would be North Lawndale, West Garfield Park, East Garfield Park, a little bit of Austin, and a little bit of Humboldt Park. Right? When you come to the south side of Chicago, there are two areas. Although violence, I mean, you have violence everywhere, but where it's really super hot, on the south side, you're talking about two neighborhoods. One, Inglewood, which is here, and just a little bit above Inglewood, you have the New City area, which is kind of a weird neighborhood. Not a lot of people know about it. Kind of back of the yards, kind of over just west of the Dan Ryan Expressway in the 50s, in the 50ish area. Okay, so those are the beat areas that have the highest rates of gun violence. This map, I know it's difficult to see, but if you could just look at the color clusters, is the Cook County map. So throughout Cook County, the various factions of gangs distributed throughout Cook County. You can see the majority of them are in the Chicago proper area. You also have some west side going into the west suburbs, few north, and down into the south suburbs. We'll talk about that a little later as well. Okay, that's the area that I just mentioned to you on the west side, right? So you can see the beat areas, 1011, that's the 10th district. You see the 11th district police station. So these numbers you see are police districts, and the police districts are broken down into beats, right? So if you want to know where the hottest hot spots are, 1133, 1132, 1131, 1122, 1112, and 1121 on the west side. 1011, which is North Lawndale, and this street that you see here is Roosevelt Road. So this is Roosevelt Road, the black line that divides 10 from 11, and then you can see the red box there is the Austin community. It's the 15th Police District. It's got 1533. You have Humboldt Park here, 1112, 1121. So this is a problem area in the city of Chicago in terms of gun violence. you're looking for areas to focus on. So let's move. So here, what happened? What's causing this problem? Well, the thing, we don't have a lot of time to talk about this, but I can tell you this. One of the things that is driving the intensity of the violence here is fear. So it's the more fear you have in the neighborhood, the higher rates of violence you're going to have. Although you don't see it in the body language and the body language and the way young African American males carry themselves externally, internally they carry a lot of fear. And that's where the need to carry weapons and I'm gonna have a little clip here where Jay-Z makes a comment about young black males and how they see each other. That drives a lot of the violence, but it's based on fear and not knowing how to deal with this fear adequately, right? In a healthy way. It plays out in violence. But the big thing that drives the fear here at the community level is if you know this area, you know that what's moving in this direction is gentrification. So a lot of the folks that live in these neighborhoods, they see their neighborhood is going out of existence. And it's creating a lot of anxiety and tension. And when you deal with young men in particular that feel that tension and anxiety, they will play that out and respond to it in violent ways, right? So it's actually, the flames of gentrification is almost like a forest fire. Imagine a forest fire coming in your direction, right? It's coming in your direction and you're trying to retreat, but there's a brick wall behind you, right? What is the brick wall? Well, the brick wall here this is the outer edge of Chicago, right? On the other side of this is a whole nother space that you don't have access to, right? And so this is a barrier for you. And so your community is being pushed and pushed and pushed to the point where it can't retreat. So there's, you're seeing people in your neighborhood, generational kind of continuity in the neighborhood. It doesn't exist anymore. And so that's a major part of the problems that you're seeing in the neighborhood. Another part of that is, along with the gentrification, is demolishing of public housing. That started back in the late 90s. So in Chicago, where you have large public housing complexes, CHA, all of these public housing projects have been demolished. And prior to them being demolished, they had been basically taken over by gangs. They were major gang territories. So when you demolished them, what you did was you destroyed the territory of the gangs and you sent them out to the other areas, displaced them. And when you displaced them to other neighborhoods, the neighborhoods that they were displaced to then had levels of tension and friction because you got these new groups of people coming into neighborhoods, particularly neighborhoods, right? So Chicago has 77 neighborhoods. These developments were not perceived as neighborhoods, they were communities, public housing communities, but they were not neighborhood living types of situations. You live in a project, right? You live in a high-rise building. It's different than living in a house or a multi-unit building, a smaller multi-unit building. You live in a major high-rise. So if you push those folks into this unfamiliar areas of neighborhoods, it creates anxiety among them. And then those who are receiving them experience anxiety because there are lack of resources for them when they get there. So everybody is struggling to try to get the few resources, and it just creates a lot of chaos. So that's one of the things we want to think about when we think about this. I'm going to skip over some of this stuff, but this is what happened to really make this stuff hit the fan. Back in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, these street organizations that we talked about, Natalie and I wrote about the Stones. I have a new book coming out about the disciples. They were targeted for federal prosecutions, large prosecutions of the leaders of these organizations. And what happened was in '89, the Stones that we write about got hit in a major domestic terrorism thing. The feds hit them. 65 of their top leaders were incarcerated. Ultimately, 200 or 300, when they finished, 200 or 300 of the top level leaders were all sent away to federal prisons, causing the body of the organization to kind of fall apart and fracture. U.S. Attorney Anton Malukas said that the feds rendered a death blow to the organization. So basically, it was killed in the late 80s. Same thing happened to the disciples. The Gangster Disciples. 95, Larry Hoover. You've heard a lot about Larry Hoover. He was the leader of this organization. They were hit in 95. 39 of their highest ranking individuals. U.S. Attorney James Burns said we ripped the head off of the snake. So took the leader out. And then about 10 years later, the Black Disciples experienced the same, kind of federal prosecution. Their leaders were all taken out. So from the late 80s to early 90s, the leadership of these gangs get destroyed or get, taken out. And then the public housing follows. The territory is taken out. And then the next thing is that the schools in the neighborhood, this is one of the things that I forgot to mention in this chart, which is the most important thing. This chart, what I didn't say about this chart, is all of these circles, you see these circles on the chart? Yeah. Those are schools that were closed. And the white school closures, the white circles are schools that were closed and not repurposed. So they're just completely closed, and that's just it. And then the gray ones represent schools that were closed but repurposed for some other use. So you can see the consistency throughout here is that school closures are in the same areas. All these massive school closures happen in the areas where there's high unemployment, just messed up education, poverty, and Black folks. Right? This is what we're dealing with, and this is behind a lot of the violence that we see. Okay, so skipping and jumping ahead, what happens now is that we have a fractured street gangs. And so the scenario that we talked about earlier when I was a kid and I saw Jeff Ford and the Stones in this building, if there was a problem and violence or something going on, one of the things that could happen, if you could engage Jeff Ford, you could negotiate with him a reduction of violence because he had influence with all of the guys. But if you take him out and the leaders out, now you got all of these guys that are here with no one really to influence them. And so what ends up happening is those guys sitting in the room now, they fight each other. They don't even fight their rivals anymore. The situation is so bad now, and we're going to talk about what's going on in Woodlawn. They're fighting from block to block each other, right? Within their own gangs. So look, let's look at Woodlawn real quick. Check out what Jay-Z has to say here, which is real interesting. Jay-Z, for those of you who don't know.
You looking at? Are you looking at me? You looking at me? And then you realize, you think I see you. You're in the space where you're hurting and you think I see you. So
let me just give us a little background here. So what he's talking about here are the level of insecurity among young African American males. And culturally speaking, one of the issues that drives the violence is not gang-related stuff as much now as interpersonal conflict, right? So he's saying here how common it is for young Black men not to be able to look at each other even in the eyes, because it's a sign of challenge or disrespect, right? As a matter of fact, you all know Dwayne Wade, the basketball player who was from Chicago. One of his relatives was killed right here on 63rd Street because of this same thing that Jay-Z is talking about. where one of his relatives gave an individual eye contact a little too long and got challenged to the point where this individual ended up shooting and killing him. And this is a reality in some of our communities. But listen to what Jay-Z, one of America's most prominent, hip hop artists.
What you looking at? Are you looking at me? You looking at me? And then you realize, oh, you think I see you. You're in the space where you're hurting and you think I see you, so you don't want me to look at you. And you don't want me to see you in such a you don't want me to see your pain. So you put on this shell of this tough person that's really willing to fight me and possibly kill me because I looked at you. You know what I'm saying? Like, so knowing that and understanding that changes life completely. What you looking at?
Yeah. So, really powerful point. Reverend Black and I were talking about this phenomenon earlier today. So what we have going on in our communities now, in the African American community, particularly among youth, you have three kind of mindsets. One mindset is one I call the marginal toolkit. It's kind of a ghettoized mentality, worldview, where you're attempting to adapt to lack of resources, but the tools that you use in your adaptation are unsustainable, they're maladaptive. So they're things like a kind of a Machiavellian perspective, kind of a non-emotional response, an aggressive kind of facade, bravado. This is a way that you're dealing with, lack of resources. You have focus on hyper-materialism kind of things going on in your life. You will subscribe to illicit economic activities because this is your way of coping with your marginalization, right? So your associated behavior is antisocial. You kind of see your community as a pathological community, and there's nothing that can be done about it. You're just trying to survive this situation. Then there is a toolkit of mindset within the African American community. I call it the Afro-cultural toolkit. It's an adaptive cultural resource, meaning that you have learned from prior generations things that you can do to help sustain you and your community. But it's based on the traditional African American values rooted in spirituality, communalism, social interconnectedness, emotional expressiveness, right? These are healthy ways to deal with being resilient in marginalized spaces. You become pro-social. These are our young people who tend to be involved in the church, who are involved in activism. They want to do things to help their communities, right? They see their communities as places that are whatever condition the community is in is not because of the internal pathology, but external forces that are impacting the community. And they want to help the community, right? It's a smaller population of young people, but it does exist. On the opposite side is what we call the Anglo-cultural toolkit. These are young people, generally go to school, do what they're told, don't get involved in antisocial behavior, but their purpose is get an education, get a job, and get that out of the neighborhood and never return again. So obviously, although we would rather see young people in that, drawing from that toolkit as opposed to the middle one, because the middle one is the one that supports the gang banging, violence kind of stuff, right? But this one is not that healthy either because you see your community as pathological, you want out and you don't want to return. The problem is this, in popular culture, this is another big thing you have to pay attention to. In popular culture, particularly African-American popular culture, which is the popular culture of the globe, like African-American youth, black and brown youth drive youth pop culture. What black and brown youth say is hot and cool is hot and cool. Right now, and this has never existed before in the history of the African-American community, pop culture is rooted in criminal gang banging culture. So what's popular now is being a thug, is being violent. That's popularized. Where that element has always existed in the black community on a small level, just like any community, now is popularized, right? And so just average kids who might live in the hood, in the black community, who would not have been involved in this behavior, they get involved because it's popular. I have a daughter who is a junior in college. Grew up in, we live in Washington Park. Some people would say the hood, right? She just called me the other day, and I was asking, sounds like you're in the car, where are you? Oh, I'm on my way to one of my girlfriends needs some help. She needs some help with what? Well, she thinks someone drugged her. She's at some little, I don't know, a lounge or a club or something, and I'm going to help. You're going to do what? So she's going to rescue one of her friends from a club where the little girl has been drugged, or she thinks she's been drugged. Someone slipped something in her drink. And I'm like, I said, that's what the police are for. Call the police. But in the culture, pop culture, it is go ride with your homies. Ride or die. So the mentality, even though this girl grew up, working class family, getting dropped off to school, picked up from school, nothing about the streets, adopts the street culture because it's what? It's popular. I got a son, a freshman in college, saw some pictures on his Facebook page, Instagram, where he's in the park with his friends throwing up gang signs. Well, that's the popular, cool thing to do. Right? Hey, folks, what's up, folks? What up? That's the common, pop culture. And it's driving that behavior. And so that's the middle one. It's been popularized. It's hot. It's sexy. And this is what the kids are into now. You got to understand that and understand how to retool them. Swap out the tools. You can't tell them just stop doing these things because then that makes them incompetent. What you do is you swap them out. And the processes and things that you can do to help swap out some of these tools to bring them over to the side that is more sustainable. So this is what's going on and we're gonna wrap up on this. This is what's going on in the Woodlawn area. All right, so all of this red that you see here, light red, dark red, represents beats that have higher than average, much higher than average violence. And then you see the areas where there is no violence. Relatively none, right? So if you look at this, our last conversation, we were with folks in Hyde Park talking about what's going on in Hyde Park. Well, what you see here are the 2nd District East beats that make up basically the University of Chicago community and neighborhood. So I always tell people, like, everybody is like, what are we gonna hair on fire about all of this violence going on in Chicago? Well, you know what? It's not like we don't know the solution to the problem. Because whatever's going on right there, surrounded by a sea of violence, they figure something out. What are they doing? Right? Not to be impacted by the levels of violence that their neighbors are. Right? So as we get to this neighborhood, so just so you know what you're looking at, this is Hyde Park proper, south of 51st Street. On the north side of 51st Street is Kenwood. For those that may not know, that is a neighborhood, that's the neighborhood that President Obama lived. So he lives north of 51st Street. When you get to 47th Street, although most people say 47th Street is the end of Kenwood, is actually not. Kenwood ends on 43rd. So a lot of times people refer to that as North Kenwood. But nevertheless, something is going on weird here, right? This is Woodlawn. Woodlawn is just south of the University of Chicago community. So when you look at Woodlawn, these are all of the shooting victimizations, and Woodlawn is in the 3rd District, 3rd Police District, and it's made up of these beats. So from January 2020 2022 to October 28, 2022, what we see are the beats that have increased violence or decreased violence. But all of the violence in Woodlawn is high. So let's don't get fooled, because you see right here, maybe beat 0313, which is right on the other side of Cottage Grove, from January 1st to October 28th, compared 2022, compared to January 1st, October 28th, 2021, the shootings are all victimization. So these are all shootings. These are fatal and non-fatal shootings, collectively, down 58%. Up 20% in 0311, and up 180% 0314. Right? So that's right in this area around here. 63rd Street is here. So it's really on north and south of 63rd Street. So you can see where you have elevated levels of violence, and then you have decreases in certain areas. But all of the violence is up in Woodlawn and the surrounding neighborhoods. In addition to that, you can look at this map, and this map shows you the gangs. Remember that chart I showed you with all of the factions of gangs? This is blown up a little bit so you can look at the gangs in the area, the gang factions. Notice here, you got factions here, all of the south area of Woodlawn and southwest, and then they pop up again north. If we extended this, you would see more of them up here. But look, no gangs in this area. Where is that? So the question is, what are they doing? What's going on there? Yeah, it's a combination of things. But one of the main things is that, I mean, it's an international institution with what? With extreme amount of wealth, a $30 billion endowment, right? They got the second largest police force in the state of Illinois. University of Chicago Police Department is the second largest police force. And they have how many students? About 14,000 students. Only 14,000 students. So that tells you that what has happened with that massive amount of wealth, they're using that to do what? To create a barrier, a bubble around the University of Chicago campus that protects it from the outside neighborhoods. Now here's the problem. Recently, Hyde Park has seen an increase in what? In shootings and violence. What has happened is, the University of Chicago has been strategic from the beginning of the migration of black people from Chicago to being involved with gentrifying black people and isolating and segregating black people into their neighborhoods. It's been one of the key forces, and as a matter of fact, University of Chicago was the first institution to be involved with redlining, right? Supporting restrictive covenants, and in addition, has been involved with early formations of gentrification and gentrifying black people out of this neighborhood. I mean, that's just the truth. But the problem is now, 60 years later, what has happened is the conditions around the University of Chicago have gotten so bad that it's beginning to permeate its neighborhood. It's now seeping into Hyde Park, because it's almost like you have some type of dome around you, but the pressure outside of that dome is so great, it's starting to create cracks and fissures, and now it's seeping in. And so what is going to happen if this thing gets too far out of control, that it will begin to then damage and destroy all of this that's in the center of Hyde Park. And this is why, you know, some people have been trying to encourage the University of Chicago to become more active in helping to solve the problems on the outside. For instance, it's a world-class institution. If you add up the number of African-American students that go to the University of Chicago as undergraduates, you're gonna find some ridiculous number like 200 or 300. Now you're surrounded by a sea of black folks. You can't find more than 200 or 300 students to attend your school, to open it up. Like if they don't, it's gonna be a problem for them down the line. They're gonna really have to look at this thing and try to fix it. Here in Woodlawn, so this is the Woodlawn community that you see with the gold circle. And it's a really interesting neighborhood, and always historically has been though. But right now, the culture of shooting and killing that's been popularized in the music of drill rap music was birthed right here in Woodlawn, right in the neighborhood, a community now, it's Parkway Housing or Gardens housing development where Michelle Obama spent some early years of her life. But that neighborhood, its street nickname is called O Block. It is the place where drill rap music was founded by individuals like Chief Keef, one of the most prominent rappers in the drill rap music scene who lived in O Block. That's right down the street, right? And so O Block is a Black Disciple BD kind of neighborhood. And the music that comes out of O Block now is the most popular music, youth music, globally. Kids all over the world are fascinated and attracted to this music.
What's it called?
It's called drill music, drill rap music. The drill stands for, drill is a shooting. Like, so if I go do a shooting, it's called a drill. And so this is music that celebrates shooting culture, shooting and killing culture, and it's popular. I heard one of the young guys say that that's a part of this culture from the beginning, says that we have made killing cool. It's cool now. It's FBG Butter. Right on the other side of O Block, this little group right here, it's called STL, St. Lawrence Gang, are their rivals. And they have a set of rappers. And over the years, hundreds of these kids have been killed in this rap gang beef that's been going on. If you go down to King Drive and make a left, you'll see a big mural on the wall of one of the most prominent rappers named King Von, who was killed in a shooting. FBG Duck, who is the leader of the STL gang, Flyboy gang in the area. But all of this is right here in Woodlawn, right? So you see these little groups, these are different gangs. On this side are the Stones that we wrote about. This is Woodlawn Street. This has been going on 60 years. This war between these guys has been going, so it's not really new, it's just now popularized in the music, right? So that's something that you want to keep in mind. If you're going to have an impact on this, you got to deal with the music and the culture because it's driving a lot of the violence. So look, I can go on with this forever, and our time is up. I will say this, and I'm going to stop here. As I said, this has been going on a long time. This is the population of Woodlawn over a 60-year period. In the 60s, the census population of African Americans in Woodlawn was 72,000 African Americans lived in Woodlawn in 1960, right? It's 18,500 left today. So that's the last census. The 2020 census of African Americans living in Woodlawn, 18,000. So when you lose, how many is that? What's the math of that? How many African Americans have been lost in Woodlawn from 1960? If I subtract 20,000 from, so that's about 50,000, right? About 50,000 people. We've lost 50,000 African Americans. That's a 74% decrease in African American population of Woodlawn over 60 years. You lose a lot of the human capital, right? A lot of the support systems are now gone from Woodlawn. And this city believes that the way to solve this problem is through gentrification. That's the reason you don't see the city coming up with any real plans. It thinks that it can just wait this thing out to the point that the community, but what they don't realize is that the lower that population gets, the more desperate it becomes. The more desperate it becomes, the more violent it gets. And the more violence it gets, the more violence your city is going to experience. Now what's happening is one of those guys I talked about, FBG Duck, it's the big thing about him is that even though he's from right here on 63rd Street, he's from the chaos here that has been going on for 60 years in Woodlawn. The Stones and the Disciples been fighting each other for 60 years, killing each other. No one has said anything about it because it's down here in Woodlawn. But FGB Duck was killed on Rush Street on the Gold Coast. Some guys from O-Block followed him because he's a rapper. He's got money. So he's down there spending money, high-end North Michigan Avenue money, and he gets shot and killed right out there on Rush Street. And guess what it did? It disrupted the whole economy downtown. And so now you have high-end store owners who are like, we getting the heck up out of here. This is crazy. And so now the city is losing that tax base. You know, that's why nobody really wants to run for mayor, because this is just too, you know, and you know, God bless our mayor, but she doesn't have a clue or a care. At first she didn't have a clue, but now it's such a difficult thing now that she's like, hey, she's thrown in a towel on this thing of silent violence. And just hoping that the gentrification will diminish the population, and then it'll kind of just wither away, but that's not gonna happen. So, okay, I gotta stop. I thank you. We could take any questions, comments, or concerns you have. Just thank you for listening, and hopefully this information was helpful. Yeah. I'll do 1, 2, 3, and 4. Yes.
I apologize for being late. I received this notification this morning, so I'm grateful for the presentation. My name is Catherine Jackson, and I want to say, I just want to make a statement. The titles are not important, but for this reason, I want to say I'm the director of the Woodlawn Restorative Justice Program, and I deal with young people between the ages 14 and 24 that's impacted by violence. And personally, on a personal level, as of this past Friday, we actually buried one of our young people due to gun violence. From September the 4th through until this past Friday, we lost 3 young men in the area that you were talking about impacted due to gun violence. Doug, the person you just mentioned, his brother was in our program. Polo was in our program. And prior to his death, a year prior to that, his cousin and his brother was killed, all in the same area that you're talking about. And the fact of the matter, when you were talking about the previous chart when I walked in about the different, I'm not sure, lifestyles.
Yes.
They were talking about, it is, when you talk about for example, your daughter, the people that are in my program are in every one of those categories that he is talking about. That is, I'm not talking about anything that I'm guessing or read about, but I'm experiencing everything that you are talking about. And it doesn't matter whether you're from the high class or, you know, got a lot of money, you know, parents at home or that, but they are following the lead about whatever the style may be, wherever the song may be, whatever you need to wear. When they leave your house, they adapt to the culture of what is going on at that time. And and each one of my young people, I call them mine, they can tell you that same story that you're talking about. Your labels are great, the information is great. And one of the challenges that I have as a director, as a servant of God, is that what do we do? Because the reality is there. And then on Friday when I went to the repast, guess what? every person that you talked about was in that room. It did not matter. It was, they were there. It didn't matter if mama or daddy was there, because it's like that. I don't have a question. I just want to be able to say, as a person that is experiencing what you have written about, your study, your research and all that, it is definitely true. You know, how do we save our community, and can these dry bones live? Yes, they can, but the key to it is exactly what you're talking about. The system that's thinking that it's going to go away is going to get bigger. It's already bigger in Hyde Park. It just hasn't came out yet.
Yeah.
It's already seeping through in your neighborhood. You just haven't seen it yet because it's there. And when I say we did it, when I say we, I'm talking about the systems. I'm talking about the institution that we've done it. You know, when I hear about the CP, Chicago Public Schools, and they talk about the numbers are high, I know that I can't prove it. I know that's not true, because what you have a community that doesn't have their needs met.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they're doing.
Can I just say,
Yes,
not to
I'm gonna
interrupt you,
sit
no,
down. Yes.
no, don't sit down. I just want to respond to your comment about Chicago Public Schools claiming that their graduation rates are at the highest level ever, right? The reason that they're able to make that claim is because they are counting kids who have graduated, but they are not counting kids who never dropped in school in the first place. So a lot of kids who would normally be considered dropouts, the way CPS calculates its graduation rates now, it excludes the kids that dropped out. So if they included those students, the rates wouldn't be as high. So they're manipulating and fudging the numbers, and I just wanted to share that with you so you'll know why they are able to make that claim. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
I think even with the numbers of people not reporting whether or not they have jobs or not, with our young people, because they're not looking for jobs. They're not in the unemployment line.
That's right.
They're not in that system, so they're not being counted. They're moving they're moving in and out of places, and they're not being counted. The census are not counting that group of young people.
It's as if they don't even exist.
Right.
And that not existing is the desperation among those people that drives the violence. That I'm not even a part of this society. Right? And so that's a good point. I was going to say,
thank you for listening, but it's real. I just want to say that on a personal level, Marcus and I, we are dealing with that. It is real.
Yes.
We are dealing with the grief of what do we do next, because it's not going to stop.
Let me just, for those of you who are not familiar with the drill music, I'm not gonna play the audio because we're in a sanctuary, and the music itself is highly vulgar, but you'll get the imagery, right? Just looking. This is the song that really started the popularity of drill music. So this is Chief Keef right here. So these are guys just get in a room now with the ability of technology, a little laptop, a microphone. You can make a song in your house and it will go viral and you will become a millionaire if you get the right distribution. So you can see these guys are just in a house. They are rapping their lifestyle, what they like and don't like. The name of this song is Don't Like. And they're rapping about things that they don't like. And most of it's got to do with having conflict with their opposition gangs, getting high, smoking weed, pointing weapons. You'll see at a certain point in time they start, pointing guns and stuff throughout. And this got this kid, you see what he got? They posted this to YouTube. It got 30 million views before it was taken down, and he got a record deal for $6 million after doing this. And so what is every other kid in the neighborhood gonna wanna do now? It's gonna try to do the same thing. he's rich. He's right up the street from just making this one album and this one song, and it just took storm. This is another one, and I didn't have time to get into this, but in actuality, a lot of kids now are catching federal cases because they're doing the same thing, and the federal government is coming in and throwing RICOs on them and prosecuting them. It's just crazy for this stuff. But here's another song that became popular. This one is called 51 Dead Ops. Ops are your opposition. And these guys who are right around the corner made a rap song, and they're naming every single kid that they've killed, 51. And they're celebrating the death of each and every 51 of them. Yes. They're rapping on what this guy is saying with guns that's rapping. He's naming the names of every person that his group killed.
Wow.
Yep. With guns. You see these guns they have?
Yeah.
That could happen in no other neighborhood. No other community.
I have a question.
Pastor, just a second.
Oh, excuse me.
No, okay. Because we had a couple in the back and
Oh,
they were
sorry.
good.
Yep.
Yes, sir. 1, 2, and then you gonna make a comment? Okay, I thought you. Okay, 1, 2, and then you 3. Yes.
I would like to take the time to just thank you because I've read your book, and as I iterated in the room over there, I grew up in Woodlawn, former student at Hyde Park High School as well as Wadsworth. The gentrification situation is very, very bleak in terms of how it's affecting the community at large. University of Chicago, as you mentioned, it's been something that has been a real mind-blowing experience for me over the years in seeing that there's been no participation to prevent through agencies that operated within Woodlawn, outside of Woodlawn, that they could have been very effective with and toward. But I've had students, when I was director of Chicago Boys and Girls Club, I've had students that attended the University of Chicago, came out pretty well, one or two, and I'm talking about 20, 30 years ago.
Ain't that something?
Okay? Maybe longer than that. But indeed, I just want to say that I'm interested in knowing right now, in terms of this group here, we need to hold people accountable, and I say accountable. This institution that he outlined, and the things that he outlined, is so true, very true. They're not, but the pressure's on them now. The pressure's on them now. Well, I don't say it's really on them, I say that it's on us, you know, to recognize and be very, very responsive to this nonsense. This is something that's, what he's talking about here. I'm going to Vegas next week. It's a kid there in Vegas. He can't wait to get back here to get about this kind of stuff, you know, because he hears about it out there. And he's been out there most of his life, you know. But again, we have to look at the forces to be, the powers to be. I've also had a lot of experience on the West Side. I want to also say, last night I talked to a gentleman that probably knows your dad. Okay, you're talking about extension workers back in the day.
Yes.
You're talking about one of them that was working and operating out of this very building, and Jeff Ford looked at him like he was a dad. Okay, this man was trying to do his job. I mean, he only had so much power to work with, but he was a guy to be reckoned with. His name was Mr. Woods. Okay, you may have heard of him. You had a gentleman on the West Side, where I came from, Henry Horner. That gentrification situation has leveled out to the point where I'm sure you know what's going on there. Now they can operate, but you had 3 factions of gangs in that corner situation right around the United Center. You know, and Major Adams is probably one of the greatest, you know, gang gurus I would call in the city of Chicago back in the day. He would be probably, you know, 95 years of age now. But I used to ask him a question, and this was in '89. I asked him a question on the West Side. Major, when was the last time there was an athlete in the Boys and Girls Club here at Henry Horner, right across the street, 75 yards from the stadium? He wouldn't respond. He was embarrassed to respond. But that was in '89. And for all of you to know something about Chicago, he responded, he said, Pierce, there's only been something like Bobby Hall and Stan Makita in this building, and that was in 1959. 30 years from 59 to 89. Those two athletes were white athletes came into that building, not one black athlete. You know, by design though, because let me speak a little bit clear to where I'm coming from with this. Working for the institution that I work for, the Boys and Girls Club of Chicago, there were 13 units on the north and west side. There was one on the south side, 6331 University. One. Chicago Boys and Girls Club is the second largest youth serving agency in the nation at that time. I don't know where they rank now because there's only about 3 clubs in the city of Chicago, whereby during the time in which you talk about in the 70s even, you had about 13 or 14. So, you know, this community, I mean not community, but this institution here, University of Illinois, Mr. Hatch Adams, I don't know if you've heard that name.
Yes, sir.
Very powerful figures on both sides of town. Able to do things if they had the real support. But now the pressure's on over here, and I think the pressure needs to be put on them even more so by groups like this, to just abandon this thing of power. You know, I mean, it's killing our community. It's killing our community. It's not gonna get any better. South of here, I want to say this. I think we have to start paying attention to what's happening south of here. I'm talking about 79th and Cottage Grove specifically.
Going all the way back to Rosedale.
The fractured gang situation now is that, you know, there's no one person running anything. They're fractured, as they say. They're fighting for power. You know, this could be a game right here. We'd be fighting amongst each other to see who's going to hold the flag and the power. You know, just 3 of us. But this is the kind of mentality that's going to ride. And with the rap industry right now, I think the community must provide a form of what the mayor calls prevention, but that's her political verbiage to get back in office, prevention. I don't see that happening. But indeed, we have to hold a lot of these people accountable. University of Chicago, the mayor, the community people. I'm done.
Just to show what you're saying in terms of the factions of gangs, you see where my cursor is right here? This is the area that we are now. So everything that you're saying about the factions, you can see all of these are nothing but factions all the way back south.
Yep.
As far south as going to Chicago Heights.
So, one quick thing. First of all, I'm wondering if the remainder of the questions can wait. So I'm trying to manage a lot of different people's time schedules here, so I just want to say a quick word about that. I'm going to be bold and ask if you could please sacrifice your time until 3 p.m. so that we do have time for a debrief and strategy meeting following this. I'm going to give Dr. Williams time to wrap up, but just so that you have that in your minds, that we'll go until 3 p.m. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm finished. I didn't get a chance to share with you a new book that I have coming out. Should be out sometime close to the beginning of December. It's called King David and Boss Davey, the Black Disciples, Mayor Daley, and Chicago on the Edge. It kind of talks about the history of, similar to the book that Natalie and I wrote, but it focuses more on the interaction between Mayor Daley and one of Chicago's street gangs at the time called the Black Disciples. So I'm really excited about that. Look forward, and hopefully we can talk about that at some point. But I could talk about this stuff all day, so I'm just gonna say thank you for having me. It was a pleasure and an honor to be here. Whenever you need me, I'm available to come, and you know we could chop it up, as the youth say, to talk about things that we could do to help fix some of this stuff. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.